as a PE teacher, I spent more time with the young women and girls and boys who got sport and PE and less with those who didn't. And you sort of realise later on in your life, don't you, that I thought I was doing the right job in kind of finding out who the best players were and coaching them and entering into competitions. And actually, most of those young people were already in clubs doing stuff. And hopefully they benefited, as I did, from that sort of experience. But I could have done so much more if I'd balanced my time with those young people who found sport harder, who didn't have the kind of the physical confidence and competence. I could have made a real fundamental difference to their life if they'd been my focus, or at least balanced my focus. So that's when I went back to those early years now, I thought I was a great teacher. I thought I was doing everything right. And actually I look back now sometimes with horror and think, gosh, I could have done so much more.
From Coordinate Sports, it's The Drive Phase, a show about sports founders, leaders and experts and the stories behind their business journeys. Our guest this episode is Alison Oliver, CEO of Youth Sport Trust. In this episode, we discussed Alison's early life growing up in Cornwall, her career in teaching, and journey to becoming CEO of YST. Alison has worked at some of the most prestigious sporting institutions in the UK, building a strong network of influence across the UK sporting landscape. We take a deep dive into the core values of YST and its current initiatives, and hear Alison's reflections on her own teaching practice and how this is shaping her work and the vision for the future of YST. A must listen for all leaders, especially those in the school sport community. Enjoy the show. Okay, so I'm delighted to welcome Alison Oliver, MBE and Chief Exec of the Youth Sport Trust, the UK's leading charity improving every young person's education and development through sport and play. And just in this last year, more than 300,000 young people have got active through YST programs. So you're really excited to welcome you to the show today.
Thank you. Looking forward to it. Thanks for inviting me, James.
Fantastic. We always try and go back and see, get a bit of insight and get to know you a bit better. But I'm interested to ask you, what would you say your earliest sporting memory would be?
Oh, what a great question. Right, so my earliest sporting memory, the one that stands out in my mind really is I can remember trying out a netball team at my primary school. I was probably in year 4 or 5, I should think, at that time. And it was the first time that we'd been introduced really to sport, as opposed to sort of lots of physical activity and lots of games and play. But it was the first time I had the opportunity to actually play sport, or I'd had the opportunity. And I do remember trying out for the team and being absolutely devastated that I didn't get in the school year 4 or year 5 netball team. But it was an important lesson. That actual memory ended up being, or still is, quite significant because of what my mum told me at the time. Stood me in good stead for the rest of my life, which is, you might not have made the team, make yourself helpful, carry the bibs, carry the balls, turn up for every practice, and you might find that they are interested in you after all. And that sort of stayed with me, really. I guess what my mum was teaching me is there are life lessons to be learned from sport, and if it doesn't happen, you have to kind of work hard, be good, be helpful, and those are good traits to have anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just really interested in that, with it being a negative memory. Generally, that's what it's all about, especially what Youth Sport Trust is doing, is providing those kind of first experiences that can shape the rest of your life. So it's interesting that you've gone this way, right, with a negative experience first. So it means it's proof that it can be salvaged after that.
I suppose it was negative that I didn't get into the team and I was disappointed, but it wasn't a bad experience. It was actually, that I was so desperate and keen to play, and I enjoyed playing so much.
Got it.
I wanted that opportunity to play. So I wouldn't say it was an unsuccessful venture into
character building.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
In terms of childhood, school life, could you just expand a little bit on kind of the landscape there? So did you grow up in Cornwall? Was that right?
I was born in Luton, actually, in Bedfordshire. Did the first couple of years of my education there, and then my family, all my family, moved to Cornwall and grew up in mid Cornwall. Went to County Primary School, Charlestown County Primary School, then on to Penrice Secondary School, and ended up very, very privileged and very lucky, getting a bursary to go off to Millfield School for my sixth form. It's an independent school and a school that had, at the time, still does, a great reputation for sport. And I ended up getting a bursary for academic and sport to go and do my A-levels there. So I had a real privilege because I had the opportunity to gain everything from a comprehensive education, but then also in those 2 years of my sixth form in an independent school, just met an extraordinary range of people from different walks of life that kind of complemented, I guess, those formative years in the state education system.
Yeah, different perspective, for sure. I mean, in terms of what shaped that kind of sporting school life, did you have any, obviously it's a hot topic as well, we probably touch on it, around girls and sport and staying engaged with sport, and obviously taking it all the way through to sixth form at this stage. Did you have anyone who kind of touched you as you were going through school? So that maybe an influential primary school teacher, or was that something that was coming from your parents at home? What kind of inspired you?
A couple of things really. So my dad was really athletic and really sporty and enjoyed his sport, and I was always more of a tomboy anyway. I had more bikes and balls than I did prams and dolls. As a young child, I loved to be active. I loved to be outdoors. I loved to play. But also, there were probably 3 or 4 people that were massively influential. So I can remember earlier about my primary school and that first experience of netball. We had a male PE teacher, a male classroom teacher who taught a lot of the PE at primary school, and he was brilliant. He gave us all as children, starting with netball, but then gymnastics, athletics, cross country. We did everything with him, and he made sure that we had the opportunity to experience all different types of sports. And I think that was really important. And now knowing what I do now as a Youth Sport Trust is giving children that range of things, some individual pursuits, some team sports, some things that are more athletic in their nature as opposed to competitive or personal challenge. It allowed us all to kind of find something that we could do and something that we enjoyed doing. So he was pretty influential. And then in my secondary school, I had the most unbelievable duo of PE teachers in Angela Furness and Linda Hyde, and remember them, embossed on my heart and my mind, who again were great role models for me in terms of their belief in us all as girls and their commitment. I mean, goodness, the number of hours that between them they committed to after school and Saturday morning sport was enormous. But also they were both members of local community clubs and provided that really important transition for me into community sport to complement what I was doing at school. And then I think when I was into community clubs, and I played netball and hockey and was in the athletics club and the sailing club, but certainly in those community club environments, I think that's where I really thrived. This sort of intergenerational environment where you can learn from the older members of the club and kind of feel put in your place at times. So look up to them and learn from them, but also have responsibility for the younger children in the club. As you go on and grow through the club, you have some responsibility for those younger ones coming through. And that again sort of gave me this experience that sport is so much more than just playing the game or just being physically active. Its contribution to my social development was huge. And Jean Davis was our club captain at St. Netball Club, and she was an amazing role model as well. So Mr. Martin, the male class teacher and PE teacher at primary school, was a guy, obviously. And then I had lots of really positive female role models who were very supportive of me and a whole group of girls that were kind of in my age group. And still now, I know that all of these people are still making a contribution to the lives of young people through, club committee positions and so on. So I had lots of good people to learn from, starting with my dad. But that very first story, it was, my mum wasn't athletic, but I think she knew me well enough as a fairly, not wayward, but a kid with too much energy and didn't really necessarily perform very well at school, got into quite a lot of trouble at primary school. She knew that sport was a place where I could learn some discipline and some responsibility for others and a bit of self-regulation and self-control. So she set me on the right road, but the sporting role models were teachers and coaches.
Netball was, I guess, first love or first passion in terms of sport. Looking at kind of, so you finished at Milford onto Loughborough. It's kind of like the ideal scenario in terms of sporting establishments, Milford into Loughborough. It's like a maybe ordained path. How was that in terms of university sport? And I guess that was like you felt at home there straight away, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess by that point I was starting to think about where next. So I was almost the complete opposite of what I was at primary school. By the time I got to university, I was a bit of a swot, really. I spent a lot of my time in the library, really interested in my degree. I did a joint degree, geography, physical education, sports science. I loved both elements. I equally loved the geography as kind of PE and the sport. But I did play sport, and I think what so many people will have experienced of university sport is, again, it's the opportunity to do things that you want to do. And obviously I did netball, but I joined the triathlon club and a few other clubs. You can kind of pick and choose, can't you, in that environment? But having, I guess, the most characteristic feature of university sport is that it's student-led. And that was then pretty important in my development as a human being, that I took on committee roles in the netball club And then I ended up being treasurer of the athletic union, in the university. So sport, again, just helped me acquire a range of life skills, and certainly that treasurer experience was some sort of professional skills that would stand me in good stead, much later on in my life. But I guess what was great about Loughborough was I had the opportunity to play and study things that I loved. So nothing about my years at Loughborough ever felt like hard work. It felt like I was doing being able to invest all my time in the things that I really enjoyed, and again benefited from some of the most outstanding and great educators that are now, but particularly then were in physical education. Some of the leading lights in physical education were lecturing. Brenda Reed, Dave Bunker. Maybe some of your listeners will know some of these individuals, but they're kind of heroes in my mind.
I guess at the time it was kind of the leading light for facilities and institutions around PE and school sport. Obviously now some of the other universities might have maybe not caught up all the way, but there's a lot more hubs around the country with really high. We're probably going to talk about Bath as well, about high quality facilities and things. But leaving Loughborough, you went on to teaching, right? So that was your next step. Was it specifically PE teaching, or were you primary level? Or what was the?
Yeah, no, specifically PE teaching. I had a very interesting entry actually into teaching, because my first job I took was in Essex at a sixth form college, where I was teaching on the then brand new A-level PE. It hadn't existed up until then, and it sort of, I think, followed on from the fact that a lot of my peers later on in my life as a PE teacher had trained through a 4-year BEd degree, without doubt what I would call as phys edders. They were trained in physical education, and they felt very much at home teaching physical education across the age range. Whereas I'd done a 3-year geography, sports science and PE degree, and then a year of a PGC, and I always felt probably a closer affiliation at the start of my career with sort of the A-level PE curriculum, less affiliation with the core PE curriculum of younger years. So yeah, it was a strange start, but again, it's given me the opportunity to teach in FE, in secondary. I haven't ever taught in primary, but then as we'll probably possibly go on to talk about, I then kind of moved into teacher training as well, had the opportunity to experience the subject from a higher education perspective again.
In terms of, I was just going to ask, what was it like at early stages of teaching? You're going in teaching brand new qualification, never been done before, and also at that age, I guess A-level, quite close to your age, leaving university. What was that like? And I guess a lot of the teachers will be able to relate with that. But
yeah.
How was it?
I've never really thought about it a lot. I sort of said to you, I was sort of a bit of a swot at university. And I think I ended up being one of those people, I don't know if this makes any sense, I've had a bit of an old head on young shoulders. Again, my experience of sport, being in community clubs and having responsibility for others and spending a lot of time with adults, playing in teams alongside adults. I always had that sort of older head. So I never really thought about the age thing. I thoroughly enjoyed and had the opportunity to coach outside of the academic curriculum. So I coached netball and coached athletics while I was in those early years of my teaching. And probably the only thing I look back on now I'm doing what I'm doing, and possibly when I was in initial teacher training as well, it started to be apparent to me, is as a PE teacher, I spent more time with the young women and girls and boys who got sport and PE, and less with those who didn't. And you sort of realise later on in your life, don't you, that I thought I was doing the right job in kind of finding out who the best players were and coaching them and entering into competitions. And actually, most of those young people were already in clubs doing stuff, and hopefully they benefited, as I did, from that sort of experience. But I could have done so much more if I'd balanced my time with those young people who found sport harder, who didn't have the kind of the physical confidence and competence. I could have made a real fundamental difference to their life if they'd been my focus, or at least balanced my focus. So that's when I went back to those early years now, I thought I was a great teacher. I thought I was doing everything right. And actually I look back now sometimes with horror and think, gosh, I could have done so much more.
Before we go on to the to YST, I was really interested about the British Academy of Sport, because obviously for me, I always got I guess in my mind, it's always been the EIS, the English Institute. Yeah. So was this the precursor to that? And I'm because I was
it was. So one day I was teaching a general studies, or I was with my tutor group at a general studies lecture that was being delivered by the then director of sport at the University of Bath, a gentleman called Jed Roddy. And this was in the kind of mid-90s. And what he was presenting to the student body in this general studies lecture was how Australia had become so successful on the international stage in sport, and the role that the AIS, the Australian Institute of Sport, had played in, really, I guess, pioneering some of the thinking around high performance sport that has now kind of been taken on, and particularly
Just a little bit ahead of the culture, weren't they? I guess back then.
Yeah, they were, and what Jed was standing talking to us, the British government here had decided that we needed to have the equivalent of an Australian Institute of Sport. It was originally going to be the British Academy of Sport, and there was a tender process, and various sites around the country were invited to apply to be the home of the British Academy of Sport. And Jed had decided, with, I guess, the powers that be at the university, that Bath wanted to pitch to be the first British Academy of Sport. And
so this would this be almost a St George's Park for Olympic sports? Or is it just Olympic sports, or is it all kind of all sport?
Yeah, no, spot on. I mean, I think I don't know actually whether it was Olympic or broader in terms of the vision. It ended up being broader than Olympic sports. Of course, netball was in there.
Sorry, Commonwealth sports. Yeah.
What was wonderful about the vision that Jed shared was we wanted to create homegrown talent. He wanted to create homegrown talent. So he wanted to kind of use the British Academy of Sport not only to be a home of our most talented athletes, but be a place that there could be a whole pipeline of youth development. The community of Bath and the surrounds could use those facilities as well, and kind of this vision that, you could be on a netball court, one side, little kids from a local primary school in Bath, and on the other side could be national team training. It's kind of this idea of the ecosystem of sport in one place, all different levels. And I just love listening to it. So much so that I then wrote to him every week, it felt like, probably wasn't quite every week, but wrote to him several times, very much annoyed his PA, saying, I want to come and work for you. And to cut a long story short, I eventually got there, and eventually he agreed to meet with me. I think I even took my school netball team to Bath, and we beat the student team, and I used that as an opportunity to tell him that he employed me, and I could help with the coaching as well. But that was the beginning, a really exciting era for me in my career. But it happened at a really exciting time for British sport, really. It was where there was so much development, and as you say, what started as a British Academy ended up being an English Institute network of a huge number of sites across the UK now. English Institute of Sport is obviously just England, but there are institutes in the home countries as well.
And in terms of Team Bath and the brand that was created around there, I know, obviously, I think I remember the football team had like a good run in the FA Cup and stuff, and then there was the netball behind it. And I was going to just talk to you around the netball, and obviously, I guess, lessons that other sports can learn from netball, how they've kind of raised the profile. And I don't know if you've got a take on it, but I think there's a lot of other sports that maybe could take a leaf out of the book, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I mean, the journey of the sport of netball has been wonderful, hasn't it? Kind of culminating with that Commonwealth gold medal, but it was probably it was years and years of hard work, but certainly a 25-year journey in the development of the real performance end of the sport, going right back to the beginning of what is now the Super League was the Super Cup, and I had the privilege of being involved in those early days where there was this kind of very clear decision taken by England Netball that we needed to improve the quality of competition if we were going to ever break through into the top three placings in the world, and we needed that league above, if you like, what we call the National League. So without going into all the detail, I think coming back to your point about the profile, what netball have done remarkably well, and I think both Frank Connolly now, but Joe Adams, now Joe Coates, but Joe Adams, who was the chief executive of netball at the time, really took a commercial and marketing expertise alongside the performance development of the sport. They had great people like Tracy Neville coaching in the sport, and I guess foundations built before that, some of which, I again had the privilege to be part of, with Lynn Gunson, one of the most decorated Silver Fern players and coaches, coming to coach over at Bath, and she helped build capacity in our system and change our thinking. But then, Joe Coates, brilliant marketing commercial brain, fantastic leader in sport, and people like Tracy Neville on the coaching front, they kind of married the two together. So we had great performance, but we also had this very tactical and strong approach to the media and getting the game on television, and sports obviously has been a great supporter of it, and ended in almost like the pinnacle for both the performance of the sport, but also the media interest and the public profile. And that team, the Roses, have been just incredible ambassadors in inspiring millions of young girls to want to play netball.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, to me, it's really really interesting to kind of hear about, because at the time you've got these, I guess, pioneers setting these strategies 15, 20 years ago, and it's all coming through now, right? So like kids nowadays are probably spoiled with the number of gold medals that are getting won, and like you see it in cycling, netball, all the sports, especially where that strategic vision has been put in place initially, and then it's all coming to fruition. So yeah, it's a bit of a personal interest of mine. Sorry to go off on a tangent, but in terms of that tenacity to get the role at British Academy, you kind of use that tactic again, right? Is that to get to go after the Youth Sport Trust, seeing that as a place you wanted to be?
It's kind of a bit like history repeating itself, actually. Maybe it says something about my personality, but yeah, when I was at the University of Bath and involved in setting up the high performance netball program, one of the things we did was set up a feeder program where we brought girls, some of the most talented girls across the country, to Bath. Had a partnership with a local specialist sports college at the time, Oldfield School in Bath, where the girls could come and study their A-levels at Oldfield School and be on the netball program up at the university. And Oldfield School, as I said, was a specialist sports college, which was one of many strands of specialist schools could hold in the late 1990s, early 2000s. You could have maths colleges and languages.
Science, yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And you had sports colleges. And I ended up being a governor at this specialist sports college. And they took me to the Sports Colleges Conference in London in I think 1997. And I sat there in this very small audience at the time. There was probably only about or so sports colleges, and the leader of the sports college movement was a woman called, at the time, just called Sue Campbell, now known as Baroness Sue Campbell, DBE. And she stood on the platform and she just talked from the heart about why sports colleges could pioneer a real different way of thinking about the power of sport in young people's lives, and particularly the role of sport in education and the role it could play in school improvement and engagement of young people who were less engaged in education. It could build, important life skills and values in young people. And I just thought, this is everything I've kind of ever wanted. It's not teaching, but it's, I believe, about education, but it's got all of the sports development kind of side to it as well, because what Sue was doing at that time was she was the chief exec of the Youth Sport Trust, which is a role I'm now incredibly privileged to hold. And our mission as a charity is to try and ensure that every child enjoys the benefits that come from playing sport. We're just trying to build a brighter future for kids through sport. And that brighter future is everything from their health and well-being to their character and the sort of life and leadership skills they have, and importantly, inclusion and developing in young people real human skills, compassion, tolerance, acceptance, and the important role of inclusion, diversity and equality in society. And she kind of talked about it. I thought, this is what I want to do. So yeah, you're right. I then didn't quite badger her as hard as I badgered, but by that point I was slightly more mature, and I just scoured the newspapers every week. At that time, I used to look in the Guardian and the Times for jobs in sport. That's kind of really before the internet got going. And eventually a job came up. I applied for it and was privileged to be interviewed by Sue. And the rest is history, really. I've been here ever since 2004.
Well, what we'll do, we'll put your email address in the show notes if anyone wants to get a job at these, they can badger you directly.
Exactly.
I'm going to touch on that. Those kind of the Youth Sport Trust as it was back then, but in terms of something that I've always been kind of interested in is that sports colleges and that network almost. It kind of, I don't know if there's many other subjects, and I don't think the other specialist colleges had that network as strong as sports. So almost like sport could bring it all together. So you've got the satellite, the primary schools feeding into the secondary schools, then all feed into the sports college. Do you think that's a bit, and you tell me what the land looks like at the moment, is that more fragmented now with kind of academies and schools moving away maybe from the traditional LEA model? Because that's something, to me, that's really valuable in terms of that. Be able to using sport, you could bring almost every school in the local authority together in some way. But is it like that at the moment still?
Yeah, it's great question, James. So in some areas, the legacy of that time, which was when we, as you quite rightly said, we had sports colleges, which were the hubs of innovation and development. We're trying out different things that you could do in and through sport. And then the school sport partnership, the local secondary schools and their feeder primary schools, all working together on a common sports development plan. Some of that still remained, where there have been inspiring individuals who've kind of fought to keep that alive. It works on a very different basis now. Obviously, between really 2002 and 2010, there was this development of school sport partnerships until, exactly as you say, every single primary, secondary and special school in the country was in a school sport partnership. And the end goal was to try and give every child, to begin with, 2 hours of high quality PE and sport a week. But by 2010, the government agreed the target to 5 hours a week. And it was, again, I was so privileged because I worked through that era of performance sport development at Bath, and then I worked through the era of school sport development at the Youth Sport Trust. And it really ended, I have to, it was a government policy. It was part of their education policy. And obviously, the government in 2010, these things happen. It leads to, new broom in, sweeps clean, and the policy disappeared. But it couldn't wipe out the human will, as I say.
I'm guessing at the time, and we haven't really talked about when you first started at the trust, but that what you developed over that period of time, it's almost like you've seen it all come to fruition, and then it's kind of gone up. It's like pulling up the train tracks, I guess. All of the infrastructure's all in place, and you could have then gone on and added other initiatives on top of it. But that 2010, 11, was that when the funding was pulled, essentially, with the government changing over at that time?
Yeah. What was really tough to take games 2 years before we hosted the Olympic and Paralympic Games.
Exactly, yeah.
Clearly, no one saw it coming. I don't think anyone would imagine that decision might be taken. But possibly, looking back in hindsight, more could have been done. Certainly, I look at my own role in that work and think, could we have done more to be prepared in case that central policy and funding went? And, was everything as good as it could be? And it's easy, isn't it, in hindsight, to look back. At the time, it was a brilliant strategy. We were visited by countries from all over the world to look at the system here. And that wasn't the Youth Sport Trust. The Youth Sport Trust had some responsibilities to government to implement bits of the strategy. But what made sports colleges and school sport partnerships amazing was the people in them, and the innovative spirit and the absolute belief in what might be possible through sport, and people who just courageously went out there and tried it and made some extraordinary things happen, particularly around youth sport leadership, particularly around inclusion. Some incredible things were happening, support for gifted and talented young people, and indeed for those least active young people. But when the change of government happened, the policy changed and the investment changed. And some things were retained. So Jeremy Hunt was the Secretary of State in the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, and he took, I think, a really smart decision when school sport partnerships and sports colleges were no more because the policy changed. He retained the 450 hub sites of the former school sport partnership network and put the school games organisers in there. And in effect, the new government's policy around school sport was the introduction of the school games and what were called Change for Life sports clubs at the time, which were, so school games was about broadening opportunities for children to take part in competition, huge value that the competitive environment gives us for personal development. And the Change for Life sports clubs were part of the Department for Health's Change for Life campaign, all about helping the least active in primary school have fun and become more confident, competent movers in adaptive sport. And so I think what Jeremy Hunt did was enable the system to keep going, didn't completely fall to pieces, but he also benefited from what had been before that 8-10 years of great development work, superb relationships between schools, experienced leaders of sports development. So that's why it was quite a smart tactical role, because it allowed some momentum to be maintained. But there's no doubt we lost a heap of ground and we're still recovering from some of that.
And in terms of obviously school games, you still got the hierarchy of competitions, you still got that opportunity there for children and young people to get involved. And that was kind of the introduction of the PE and sport premium at that time. Is that right? Or we come in maybe a couple more years after? Yeah,
that's right. 2013, the primary PE and sport premium came in sort of off the back really of the London Olympic and Paralympic Games, and a recognition that, a good and right recognition that if we want to be a more active nation, the place to start is in our primary schools, where we have most often non-specialists teaching PE. So you're really familiar, James, that in the primary school, generally, most primary schools, the class teacher teaches across the curriculum. They teach all the subjects.
Yeah.
And that obviously means you've got non-specialists teaching it. In some cases, you've got people teaching it who really haven't had significant training in teaching PE, even the number of activity areas in physical education and the health and safety and all of that. So a lot to take on board. So you've got
because that 1 year PGCE, it's all subjects, right?
Yeah, that's right. So you could have had a few hours of training. Still now, the statistics are that our primary PE teachers could have as little as 6 hours training in physical education to deliver PE to children from reception to year 6. It's just not enough. So the primary PE and sport premium was its original investment that was £160 million a year, rising now to £320 million a year. But it's an investment of cash distributed to individual schools for them to decide how best to spend that in order to improve the quality, accessibility of PE and sport, raise the profile of the role of sport in the school, give children a broader range of activities, etc. And that's done some amazing things. But one of the things we've been concerned about at the Youth Sport Trust is that's okay if you're a primary school with expertise and capacity and know what to do with that money to get the very best return on the investment. But because, as you mentioned earlier, local authority advisors don't really exist in the main now for physical education. So you've got a lot of schools on their own trying to decide how best to use that money. And we know that not all of it has made the biggest difference that it could. And of course, lots of individual schools can't take advantage of kind of economies of scale where the school sport partnerships could. And some school sport partnerships are still thriving, as I said earlier, and really helping schools in their area make best use of that primary PE and sport premium, doing it efficiently and effectively.
Do you think, I know it's come under some scrutiny, obviously we'll probably talk about the position in terms of where the funding is at the moment, but do you think that scrutiny is fair, essentially? So because I look at the headline figures are X amount of money invested in PE and school sport over 8-year period, 10-year period, and has it delivered? Whereas it's hard to maybe quantify the amount of investment into other subjects, essentially, if that makes sense. Do you think that's fair to compare? I think because it stands alone, it's like a ring-fence budget. It's like we can say, well, that hasn't delivered. Whereas numeracy literature, there's heavy investment going into all areas of school life. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does make complete sense. I mean, the primary PE and sport premium hasn't been subject to high levels of scrutiny, the same way that the core subjects, English or numeracy and literacy, have.
Yeah.
So if someone asked that question, how much difference has it made? Where were we? Where are we now? That's not our question I believe anyone can answer. At an individual school level, providing there haven't been changes in personnel, they may be able to describe that. But Ofsted haven't played a big role in evaluating.
Right, so it's difficult to see that distance travelled with the funding that's been put in place. But I guess at the same time, you could look at health stats, which aren't improving. So then it's probably not the best one to pick to justify the investment.
Well, I think that's one of the biggest challenges, Jade, for sport, is all the things, whether we're talking about improving physical health, mental health, standards in education, antisocial behaviour, sport is never going to be the biggest driver of improvement in those areas on its own. So this is one of the challenges we face with sport and it getting the sort of investment that I think it deserves, because it doesn't make enough of a difference in a short period of time to any one of those things. But if you look at the long-term impact, so take the long-term impact of getting children physically literate and loving sport and motivated to be active, the long-term economic impact and health impact is huge. But sport doesn't do it quick because you're laying foundations down and behaviours and lifestyles that later down the line. But equally, if you were able to look across all of those social outcomes, you'd see that sport actually makes a really big contribution. It doesn't on its own isn't enough. So that's, lots of people have said, well, nothing's happened to childhood obesity in the years since 2013, and we've had this money tipped into primary PE and sport. Well, obesity is a much more complicated issue than calories in, calories out.
It's other factors, exactly, yeah. Exactly that. I think it's finding a way, obviously from our point of view, we're always looking at data, and it's like finding a way of quantifying that impact across all those areas and being able to tell the stories is extremely valuable. In terms of the funding as we stand at the moment, still same as last year, I guess there's kind of delayed announcement to what the future looks like for the PE premium. I mean, in terms of the Youth Sport Trust's position on that, what would be the ideal scenario? Because it sounds like things are changing and it's going to be different. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the vision for that, or what your position would be, what would you like to see happen? Or maybe would you have liked to see happen already?
Well, it's an interesting one. At this moment in time, the most important thing is that investment isn't lost to PE and school sport. So we're campaigning quite hard at the moment to see the primary PE and sport premium investment still for next year. We think it'd be an absolute disaster given consequences of COVID and lockdown on children's physical, social and mental health if the opportunities that investment underpins were kind of whipped away at this moment. But our real desire is for a long-term strategy. So with the primary premium and the school games, it's been short-term funding, which means just as people get going and start to get things going and think about planning for the long term, they can't proceed because they're waiting to know whether the money's going to be there again. And I think if we had the ability for people to strategically plan over ideally a 10-year period, so you could actually look at the progress of children as they come into primary school right through into their secondary years, and you could plan what that looks like and you could build towards it, that would be great. And second to that, James, would be real join up across government. So we don't have to necessarily have separate conversations about the contribution to health, the contribution to education, the contribution to community cohesion and so on. Is that sort of that this long-term joined up strategy would be about helping young people be happier and healthier, and recognizing that those two things will drive lots of the other social outcomes, rather than, as you mentioned earlier, having to justify them perhaps against the obesity crisis alone.
Yeah, I mean, like, brings us back to what we talked about before in terms of the long-term vision for netball or cycling, whatever it was back then, and 10, 15 years ago. You can set it, you can make that investment, and everyone feels a little bit more secure and can make decisions based on the future rather than that 3-year cycle. For Youth Sport Trust, how do you, on a day-to-day, what are your major challenges in terms of leading the organisation? Because the number of partners and the number of impacts you're making across the country, how do you kind of, what are the kind of recurring challenges that come up for the CEO?
Gosh, great question. I think one of them I've already alluded to is, we're a charity. We're not underpinned by any funding from anywhere. We have to go out and earn it or raise it or ask for people to support us because we're a good cause. So that's always, any charity chief exec, I'm sure, would be saying that is an issue. It's just the sustainability of the charity. Not because we want the Youth Sport Trust to be here forever, but because we want to do the work. So we need that investment to do the work.
What's the model at the moment? Is it kind of a fundraising model or sponsorship or corporate partnership? How does the funding stack up essentially?
It's all of those things actually, James. So there are some charities that are based solely on individual giving, donations and fundraising, and some that survive on trust and foundation grants and so on. We have everything, literally, from some lottery awards, some exchequer contracts where we're delivering work on behalf of government. Trust and foundations have been very generous to us. We have people that run the London Marathon. We have a number of business partners and sponsorship arrangements. So we, again, because of our history and talking about that sort of 2010 time where we were very, very heavily supported in the work that we did by the government strategy, that was kind of supporting a lot of the work that we did. We tried to create a diverse funding model. So we are now getting income from a whole range of different things, which means we're less vulnerable funder, but it means you've got a lot of paymasters that you need to nurture and foster relationships with and report to. So that would be one of my challenges, is the range of people that we need to make sure that we demonstrate our impact to, show enough gratitude and care for. And then probably, I think one of the hardest things for the Youth Sport Trust is we try and do two things. We try and make a difference for every child. So we're trying to work at the system, trying to protect the place of physical education as a fundamental right to every child, part of their education. And we're trying to support the profession alongside other organisations like the Association for PE to try and make sure that the profession are as supported and equipped as possible to cope with, generations that keep changing and want different things. But at the other end of that, we do some really targeted interventionist work, which is very deep in its impact on a very small number of young people. And a lot of that work is around inclusion or the empowerment of young people. And often, therefore, from the outside looking in at the YST, it's like, what are you? Are you supporting PE? Or are you kind of about, youth development? And actually, we want to be both. Stories of deep impact and that more interventionist work around things like young people's character and their sense of belonging, and their empowerment and their voice make the case for the system-wide improvements and sustainability that we're talking about on the other side of our work. But it does lead to people kind of not quite big.
I was just going to ask you about perceptions as well. So in terms of like, there's anything that, and it's a constant challenge, I guess, across the industry as well, to kind of understand exactly what everyone's doing. But are there any misunderstandings or myths, perception, or something that kind of pushes your buttons, I guess, that you'd love to be able to educate everyone on?
Gosh, that sounds like that might be a loaded question. That you might have some of those.
No,
I don't know. I think, understandably, people sort of back in, the 2010 era might have thought we were a government agency because we were working in support of that government strategy, which we weren't. We were a contracted delivery agent, but people didn't really know that we were a charity. And in actual fact, we made an explicit decision as a charity at that time to make the brands of the specialist sports colleges and school sport partnerships the most important thing in the public profile, not the YST. So when all of that went and we started to pop up and say, hey, we need support, people were like, well, who are you? We're like, well, we were part of all of that, and now we're not, supported in the same way, but people hadn't seen us and our brand, and we've learned that sort of lesson along the way. I think the other thing is the landscape for sport, as you know, James, is really busy with loads of organisations all trying to do really good work. And we work, one of our values, is organisational values, is partnership working. And we love working in partnership, but indeed I don't think there are any programmes that we deliver where we don't work in partnership. But I think, again, for a long time, because the youth sport was leading on quite a bit of school sport, there was a perception that we didn't work in partnership. It was all about the Youth Sport Trust. And if I had the opportunity through this podcast to kind of try and put the record straight on both of those things, is we want to work with government because government has such a huge influence on public policy areas that can affect every child. So we want to work with, we're not them, and we're sufficiently independent that when we think things aren't right, we can speak up on behalf of our beneficiaries. And on the other side, we do everything in partnership. As I say, there isn't a programme that we do, and I challenge anyone to tell me that there is. But I think, that's a challenge for us all in the landscape, because everybody needs to carve their own space in order to be, legitimate and to be able to raise funds for its work. But increasingly, funders want people to work in partnership in order to access their grants. So that is really positive in supporting that way of working.
Definitely. I mean, I was going to ask about the kind of the vision, I guess, the next 5-10 years, and maybe underpinned by having that long-term funding in place and things like that, obviously for the school side of things, school sports side of things. Is there, for yourself and for the trust, do you have and it might have been amended slightly with the pandemic, do you have a kind of a set, this is what we're going to look like in 5 years or 10 years time, or is it? I'm sure you do, but yeah, I'd like to hear it there.
So we just coming to the end, or in 2022, spring 2022, we'll finish our current strategy, right? 22. So it's a well-timed question because we've literally just launched the consultation on our new strategy, which will run from 2022. And one of the things we've done, James, or we've repeated actually, in 2020, we commissioned the Future Foundation, as it was then, to undertake a piece of work on our behalf around what's called the Class of 2035. 2015 was our 20th anniversary, and we commissioned the Future Foundation to produce a report called the Class of 2035. So instead of using our 20th anniversary to look back at 20 years, we used it to look forward 20 years. And we've just recommissioned that in 2020 to do an update to second edition. So the Foresight Factory is the new name for the Future Foundation. They're doing that work for us. And we see that again, as it was in 2015, fairly fundamental in the strategy that we're working on now. That report will set out what we need to be doing if we are to mitigate or indeed take advantage of some of the trends that the Foresight Factory are projecting for us in the future. The dream is that we never have to spend any time and energy fighting for physical education to be at the centre of a child's education, and that there is sufficient both will and investment around that all young people, regardless of their background, can access youth sport. It isn't just those with supportive parents or financial resources, that there is provision for everybody, because two things are happening in the world and I can't see any of them changing dramatically. One is we're slowing down, we're doing less movement. The other is everything's becoming automated. So the things we need to take care of most are physical health, and making sure we can take care of our bodies and keep ourselves fit enough, and the consequent impact on our mind. But secondly, we need to keep doing the things that computers can't do, and that's human interaction and really honing our skills on things like compassion and empathy and tolerance. And I think sport helps us learn those things better than anything else. So those are the two things I'd want to see us working on in the future. 10 years time, we're working on the health agenda and continuing to help young people stay healthy, find their way into a healthy lifestyle. But secondly, we've got all sorts of great projects going on where young people are becoming the very best version of themselves so that they can thrive in what is going to be an increasingly digital and mechanical world.
That was one of my questions. I mean, what as a teacher, an educator, and obviously leading the trust, what's your take on online lessons, or virtual lessons? That obviously they had to be rolled out quickly, rapidly last year and scaled up. In terms of for the future, I guess I'm interested in what your take on that is, because being a teacher and having actual physical contact with the pupils versus the virtual setup that we had to use recently.
Well, I think in terms of learning of academic, we don't know yet. We don't know how effective virtual learning or online learning has been, because we haven't seen the impact of it on what children have acquired and retained and so on. So I think it's a bit hard to say that, but I suspect there are things that can be done through a digital medium or digital vehicle. But having been a teacher and worked in schools for a good proportion of my career, and even now the work that we do in schools are environments, are communities of people. If we ever start to think that all schools are about is the acquisition of knowledge in a suite of academic subjects, then we've kind of lost the plot. What the school is an environment where we learn how to exist in communities, and we learn so much from being with people, and the role that teachers play is not just to teach the academic curriculum, it's to be role models, to help young people cope with the challenges they go through as they grow up, the pastoral care that happens there, the rules and the respect that we acquire in school. So I would hate to think that this year, because of how much learning has been moved online, there's a kind of ever a belief that we don't need schools and children could sit at home and look at a laptop and learn stuff. But I do think there will and there should be a bit of a shift in actually schools. What happens during the school day might be much more about skills and attributes and less about knowledge, because computers kind of, if we want some knowledge, we can put it in Google and we can find something out, can't we?
Yeah, exactly. I know everything as long as I've got my phone with me. Exactly.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that everything should be just looked up on a computer. I think it's really great that we have a certain level of education, but I think that the school environment and all the great things that our schools do that don't often get measured and don't often get celebrated. We don't see big banners outside schools, talking about how many people they might have saved from, all sorts of terrible consequences that have happened in their lives because of the pastoral care that happens there. But we do see big banners out there about how many GCSEs have been acquired at a certain level or SATs results. So I just think that could do with a bit of rebalancing. I think that's probably what I see, if anything, as a result of what we've learned in the last week.
I wanted to just touch on a couple of the initiatives. I know National School Sports Week, hopefully we're in time when this episode airs, is...
Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, that's going to come. What's the date for that? Is it end of June?
Yeah, it starts on Saturday the 19th of June. It runs the weekend, so that parents and carers families can get involved, and then the week starts the 21st of June.
Fantastic. So almost planned that we'll be releasing before that happens. So great.
Brilliant.
And the Well Schools movement, I just wanted to touch on that because I know that's a new initiative and it kind of groundbreaking, right? Bringing those founding schools together and starting a movement.
Yeah, really, really exciting, James. Actually, it's been quite a big part of our work this year, brought forward because of COVID and the consequences for young people's health and well-being. And the Well Schools movement is exactly what it says on the tin. It's not a programme. It's not something you have to pay to be part of. It is simply like-minded schools coming together in the spirit of, if we want to give children a good education, our schools need to be well. We need to have staff who are well. We need to take care of staff well-being if we want great education to happen. We need to have a curriculum that we call it the well-equipped pillar of Well Schools, a curriculum that equips young people for the world today. So some of the things we've just been talking about, a curriculum that isn't just all about getting children through exams. It has enrichment and it has a value placed on subjects which young people can succeed in, not just a standard suite of subjects, but it kind of is more personalised. And then importantly, that a Well School is a school the third pillar is well prepared, is a school that prepares children in terms of their physical literacy and their health literacy to stay well for the rest of their lives. And that's where our PE and play and sport piece comes in. But the Well School movement is being led by a school leader board. We are simply the secretariat. We've funded with support, enormous support from the Bupa Foundation, the platform, which is the Well School movement. And any school can go on that platform and see what other schools are doing in either the well-led pillar about staff well-being, the well-equipped pillar around the curricular and co-curricular provision, or the well-prepared pillar around physical and health literacy. And we encourage schools to register with the movement, because the more members of that movement we have, the more influence its voice can have at a higher level.
Yeah, I mean, I checked out the site myself, and definitely, if you're looking for the best practice resources and things like that, it's fantastic to get it. Just jump on there, you can access it immediately.
Thanks for your support, James.
Yeah, no problem. There's a few more questions, and they're more around yourself and how you kind of approach things. I mean, normally we look at your tips on leadership or business mantras, or your kind of approach to leading this organization, which is, like you said, partnerships everywhere, a huge number of stakeholders. Do you have a specific approach that you would say underpins all of your leadership style? And I've got the hashtag that I'm sure we'll share on social when we get it up at the episode.
Yeah. So my hashtag is when we play, life gets better. So part of my leadership is got to walk the walk and talk the talk. So that's quite important, and to keep the environment of work playful, because I do think we need play to be creative. Play brings out the best in us. Play is how we learn stuff. So I kind of encourage that. But I think probably the biggest thing that I've leaned on and relied on is both what I've learned from other leaders, but also I think what's in my heart is the purpose behind the organisation. So I've always used our mission, why we exist, the moral purpose behind the Youth Sport Trust, to help young people be healthier, happier, more successful individuals, and the values that we have of the organisation of trust, responsibility, integrity and partnership working. If I stay close to those things every day in the decisions I make, the relationships that we build, the way I look after the staff or work with the staff, if I keep those front and centre, I can't go too badly wrong.
Always moving forward against those, against those core.
I think that's probably my leadership lesson, but I've learned that from watching other great leaders who are mission-led leaders and values-based leaders. That's always felt to me as a great way to kind of lead, more in that sort of servant leadership model, where you're there to make sure everybody else in the organisation can do their job, not you're there so everybody else can work for you.
Exactly. Do you have any habits or routines that you use to stay on, I guess, top performance, or to deal with the stresses and challenges of the role?
I have, actually, and they've become sharp into focus in the last 14 months. So I'm not, all the things I've said about sport, I'm not a great athlete. I've never been particularly good at anything. I try really hard. But since the start of the pandemic, since we moved into lockdown and I started working remotely, I get up at 5:30 every day, and the first hour and a half of the day, I go for a long old plod run, and then I have a little kind of, I guess some people would call it yoga. It's not really yoga, it's just a little routine of exercises that I do. And it's just been really important for me, just a constant reminder that we need exercise to be good. It's been my way of taking control of the day at the start of the day. And I just do think that I think better, I think more clearly if I'm moving and being active. So it's not a particularly groundbreaking technique, but making sure I exercise every day. And I find the only time when I can really protect that time is first thing in the morning. And when it's up at 5:30, or no one bothering me.
Well, that's what they say. Win the morning, win the day. Is your phone on at that time? Are you checking emails at 5:30, or is that protected that time before you start work?
I don't let it. No, I mean, I've been not obsessive about it, but I need to do it. I want to do it. So I self-police that is I'm not going to let anything stop getting out. Once I'm up, I need to get out and get going. I'm not going to sit and read emails at 5:30. No.
Yeah, definitely. You've got to carve that time out and protect it. I love that. Final question for me. I'm conscious of being respectful of your time. If you could go back to your younger self before you started out in your career, so 21-year-old Alison, and go back and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh, gosh, that is some question. I think the advice I would give me would be the advice that I'd give to other young people is find what it is you love and try and pursue that as much as possible. As I've described to you, my career, I've had an amazing career. I'm so lucky and privileged to do it. But you do think as a youngster that you need to please other people, or that perhaps there's expectations on you, or sometimes you just don't know what you're going to go and do. There are loads of young people I talk to who don't know what they want to do. And I think if you can find inside what really lights your fire, then you'll find a role that fits for you. But if you don't know what that is, you'll probably keep searching for a long time to try and find out what it is that motivates you. And I was really lucky because I think I found it quite early, but teaching wasn't absolutely right for me, and it wasn't really until I came to the Youth Sport Trust did I finally go, I'm home, this feels right, I'm doing something that I love, but it's making a difference to others, and it's trying to change the world a little bit, as well as, you know, live out things in me that need to come out and need to be put to good use.
Definitely. That was make it easy to wake up at 5:30 as well with that. No, everyone. No, brilliant. Thanks so much for your time, Alison. I really appreciate you coming on the show this week.
Not at all. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, James. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this week's show. You can subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can write to us at dryphase.podcast@coordinate.cloud, tweet us at coordinatesport, or follow us on Instagram at coordinate_sports, or on my account at James_ventures. This episode was produced by Nancy Kwamboka, with support from Claire Goodchild and Lola Small, with special thanks to Rochelle. I'm James Moore, and you've been listening to The Drive Phase from Coordinate Sport.